Let's do this, okay, whatever we got written down here. Over the waterfall. Y'all heard that on the video early.
By the way, dancing is allowed.
Going out.
Well, good afternoon, archival colleagues. I hope that you're enjoying MERAC 2022 as much as I am. My task for our time together is to share some insights and reflections on a recent Recordings at Risk project called Preserving Appalachian Voices in the Michael and Carrie Nobel Klein Collection. I prepared two versions of my presentation, a short one and a long one. So here's the short one. In 2022, Berea College, aided and abetted by the Council on Library and Information Resources, uploaded so many access files and uploaded so many huge preservation files onto the cloud that we nearly strained the East Coast's electricity grid. Or so it seemed. Well, that's the short version. Would you like to hear the long one? Okay, thank you. I'm glad you did. The longer story is that in 2019 and 2020, Berea College utilized a CLIR Recordings at Risk grant to further its long-standing commitment to preserving Appalachian voices. What I mean by preserving Appalachian voices is, first, allowing the peoples, plural, of Appalachia to convey their own thoughts, experiences, and cultural expressions in their own ways, and two, taking steps to assure that this information will be available for study by future generations. Now, Berea College is not alone in this quest. There are many other archival repositories that have significant Appalachian holdings. Some are much larger than ours, but few are older. Berea College has been preserving Appalachian voices intentionally since 1914 and possibly earlier. If you get nothing else from this presentation, I hope you will take away a sense that even a small college or a small archive can make a large contribution to the humanities if it has sufficient resources and a passion to serve the peoples and cultures represented in its archival holdings. Well, let's begin by unwrapping some layers of context that led up to the Klein project. For those who are not familiar with Berea College, it is a liberal arts, tuition-free work college located in Madison County, Kentucky, where the Bluegrass region meets the Cumberland Mountains, ancestral homes of the Shawnee and Cherokee nations. Founded in 1855 and inspired by the vision of Acts 12:26, Berea was the first college in the South to admit African Americans and women. The college was founded by an abolitionist minister and educator, Reverend John G. Fee, who established the school, the community, and its Union Church as experiments in applied, inclusive Christianity based on the concept of equality under God. As you might guess, the idea of racially integrated co-education was not universally applauded in a slave state. The school closed in 1859 when college leaders and families were forced out by a pro-slavery vigilance committee. Undeterred, Fee recruited new students as he ministered to African American troops and their families at nearby Camp Nelson during the Civil War. And the college reopened again just as soon as it could in the fall of 1865. From its beginnings, Berea College has focused on serving the educational needs of Appalachians, especially those who cannot afford a college education. In 1894, the trustees decided to stop charging tuition altogether. That tradition continues today. In lieu of paying for tuition, all students work at least 10 hours per week on campus. The pay they receive for that work is sufficient to cover their living expenses if carefully managed. Most Berea graduates leave with little or no debt, a lot of valuable work experience, and a hunger for social justice. Berea College's efforts to document Appalachian voices began in 1914 with the establishment of the Weatherford-Hammond Mountain Collection. This 22,000-volume special collection documents Appalachia as recorded in published texts, audio, and video. Hutchins Library established a special collections and archives department in the early 1970s. Since its founding, the archival program has acquired 6,500 cubic feet of college records, personal and family papers, the records of local and regional organizations, maps and ephemera, and non-commercial audio and video recordings. These resources preserve thousands, if not tens of thousands, of lived experiences and cultural expressions of the peoples of Appalachia. To demonstrate the scope of this work at Berea College, let's take a quick look at one significant type of holdings: oral histories.
One time he was a farmer, an old-time farmer, cleaning out his barn one spring, hauling the barnyard manure out, scattering it over his garden. So he come out of the barn lot, and he had a little road to go down, and then into the garden. Well, he was going down that road that's loaded in his sled. Met a little boy. This little boy is like myself. He didn't know too much. And this little boy met him. Well, this old farmer stopped his team to rest. The little boy said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm cleaning out my barn." He said, "What are you going to do with it?" The little boy said. "Well," he said, "I think I'll put this load over my strawberries." The little boy looked up and he said, "Chee hee hee." He said, "That's kind of funny." He said, "We put sugar over our strawberries."
A little Appalachian wit and humor. It is also worth noting that Berea College Special Collections and Archives has not just waited for scholars to seek us out. For more than a decade, the department actively fostered new research by providing sound archives fellowships. Although the program was very successful, it came to an end in 2016. However, I am pleased to announce that this summer, the former Archives Sound Fellowship program is returning as the Media Archives Fellowship program. We have already accepted our first recipient, and we've also received grant funding to double the program next year. Now let me introduce you to the Klein Collection. As you can see, if you can see the screen, it is a very large, complex group of materials, 129 boxes divided into 77 series. That's a lot of series. In 2015, the Kleins donated approximately 3,000 of their audio and video recordings to Berea College. These assets include oral histories, informal conversations, public speeches, music performances, recordings of business meetings and public events, and a number of highly crafted radio programs produced by the Kleins using their field recordings. This is the body of material that sound archivist Harry Rice had in mind when he brought a Recordings at Risk grant application to my predecessor's attention. Because this was his project from beginning to end, let's let Harry Rice tell us about it in his own words. Ben?
In the Department of Special Collections and Archives here at Hutchins Library. I have been in that work since 1996. The media collections in Special Collections and Archives are fairly large, especially in comparison, contrasting them to collections in college libraries of similar sizes. They focus a lot on documenting the history and culture of the Appalachian region and the history of Berea College. Great majority of it is audio, though there is a good bit of video as well. In terms of content, we have lots in the way of documentation of traditional regional Appalachian traditional music. Recordings come from the work of folklorists and other researchers, but also recordings of traditional music performances here at Berea. But there's also a substantial amount of oral history audio materials that, again, document performers and folk tales, folklore, and oral history with various faculty and staff, and in some cases students here at the college. Total number is something like 20,000 items. Portions of the Michael and Carrie Klein collection we decided to focus on for Council for Library and Information Resources, Recordings at Risk. The Klein collection came to us in about 2015, I think, and Carrie and Michael Klein are folklorists and musicians who were based in West Virginia for many years, and they worked certainly a good bit in West Virginia, but also a number of other states, including Pennsylvania and Maryland and Massachusetts and North Carolina, I think. We started developing the grant application in the early fall of 2018, but it was an important part of the process of researching for any similar collections that might have already covered the territory. We came out satisfied that the material in these 4 projects was essentially unduplicated in any other archives. Another important aspect of writing the grant was identifying individuals who could make strong recommendations from a scholarly perspective as to the value of the material and the value of making them available for broader research use. It was particularly noted that our folks who recommended the collections were well qualified and enthusiastic about recommending that the work be done. The points that the grant application wanted us to make clear was that we knew what we were doing in terms of best practices. And so our previous experience with a multiple year digitization put us, I think, a little bit ahead of the game in terms of preserving audio-video materials in terms of file sizes and digital storage. Right, we began focusing efforts real strongly in the early fall of 2018. The good bit of effort took place over the next 3 or 4 months or so. I think the grant started May 1st of 2019 for approximately a year's time. And so we immediately started getting things together, shipping the media to the contractor. We eventually, as digital preservation was done, we received that material back, and eventually the contents were uploaded to cloud-based preservation and access application.
Straight was of course to the top of.
Okay, so there you have Harry Rice scripted, and I just felt it was most appropriate, since this was his project from beginning to end, that he would come address you. He demurred the opportunity to be with us in person, so we set up a camera, and his insights, I think, are a good start to understanding the scope of our project. What I'm going to list now are some of the steps along the way, and this is not a complete listing. I'm sure there are things steps that Harry took that I'm not aware of, but here are some of the things that I'm aware of that took place. It began with project envisioning and staff buy-in, yes, convincing administration that this should be done. Selection of recordings and supplemental materials to digitize. Choosing scholars to write letters of support, very important. The application was actually submitted in February 2019 and approved in April. Another step was to review individual permissions, negotiation of copyright terms with the clients, and then setting aside materials that don't have permissions for further investigation. There was the preparation for and outsourcing of the digital content and normalization of the files, followed by creation of metadata and uploading into Preservica. More on process, adding hyperlinks to the online finding aid, creation of individual library catalog and WorldCat records. This was one of the stipulations required by CLIR. There we go. And CLIR contacted us when our college closed due to COVID precautions to see if we wanted a 6 months of extension. We raised our hands and said, yes, please. And they were very gracious about that. Then there was the creation of a library guide, a LibGuide, to serve as the project homepage, followed by testing and tweaking, and more testing and tweaking, and more testing and tweaking, and the writing and submitting of the final report, which went in January of 2021. Some outcomes to discuss. Yes. We didn't end up with just 700 recordings, as we thought. We now have 1,967 CLIR files in Preservica. Of course, you can divide that number in half because there are always preservation copies and access copies, but still, that's more than we had originally intended in the grant. Followed by 593 library catalog records and an equal number of OCLC WorldCat records. You wonder if you're doing the math, it doesn't exactly match, and that's because a good number of these have 2 entries, one for side A, one for side B. And so it ended up being 593 distinct units in the catalog. One updated finding aid with direct links to online content. One library guide, the project homepage. One press release and several social media posts to help us spread the word. And then a blessing and a curse. The donors were so pleased at what we had done that they started asking us to do it all. Remember, we tried to tackle just about 700 recordings initially. Okay. So to give you a sense of our resources connected to this collection, I want to give you a little tour now, if we can. We're going to move into our LibGuide. And let's scroll down just a little bit past the CLIR logo. We're so grateful for their help. Over on the left, you see a content overview, which explains that there are 77 series in this collection, but this grant only was dealing with 7 series of materials documenting Appalachia in West Virginia and in Pennsylvania. Over on the right then, we give you the series description and then links to the actual assets. So can we now go over to the digital for Pendleton County? So here is our link directly to Preservica, where in this series we have 6 folders. And can we open one of those folders, please? Some are audio, some are videotapes, but you see, scrolling down, many, many assets within those folders, all of which are available for this series. And then, yes, let's open up one of the individual records. And this is how it works also for the audio recordings, or if there's video, or if there are photographs. Great. So there's Grace Dyer on one of her interviews. Let's back up, please, and go back to the LibGuide, if we may. Now, so to access these resources, you can also go to the Finding Aid link. So for our full Finding Aid in archive space, we have additional information and then, of course, links to individual things. If you open box 13, please, lucky box 13, and scroll down a little bit, you will see our subject that we saw before, Grace Dyer, and even in archive space here, then we have the links to the recording of the interview or the log or the transcript. There we go.
Well, I was blessed with a mother who was interested in history when other people didn't, bother much about it. But as I told you a while ago, the first...
Blessed with a mother with an interest in history. What a wonderful way to grow up. Okay. So that's just a quick view of how we have linked our different systems together to help researchers find what they need. And of course, here's an example of one of our catalog records, this one for Grace Dyer, with the multiple links to the actual assets in Preservica and a copy of the WorldCat record. So there are many ways that people can find this material and access it. It was very important to us. But how about some unanticipated outcomes of the project? And these are all incredible side benefits that we had not necessarily foreseen before. First of all, a revived relationship with the Ohio County, West Virginia Public Library. Our institutions had worked closely together a decade ago, and then we kind of forgot each other. But this project allowed us, or actually forced us, to get back together and talk about, again, do you have the permission forms? Do we have them? Well, let's combine our resources here to make sure that everything is okay on this and that you can help us promote it, and we'll help people promote it from your side. A new relationship with interview subjects and their families. A lot of these interviews were done in the 1990s, and some of the subjects are dead. Those who are living were glad to hear something came out of this, and the descendants of other subjects were actually in tears when we contacted them to say, did you know your grandfather's voice or your grandmother's voice is on this database? And we want you to know that this is here because this is part of your family heritage. Those relationships are crucial ways of building community out of assets like this. New collaboration with West Virginia Wesleyan College. We shared some assets that they had the rest of, and through this project, it brought us back together to the table to talk and to feel good about working together. And then we started getting, like a day or two after this went live, we started getting inquiries from other organizations. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, called us up to say, you know, we're doing an oral history project on weather history, and you've got some stuff in this Klein material that is relevant to what we're doing. Can we borrow it, or can we provide links? And we said, of course, yes. Glad to work with them. And then a few days later, the Steamboat Era Museum of Irvington, Virginia called us with the same thing. We're documenting local history about life on the river and in our area, and we found some of these CLIR recordings give insight into what life was like here 100 years ago. Can we use them? And we said, yes, please credit us. Bring people to our website. And yes, the Kleins on their next visit to campus brought us a few more items and told us that they were going to leave the archives a bequest in their will, which is very nice. In fact, and it's not just going to the college, it's not just going to the library, it's going to the Harry Rice Digital Collections Fund. Thank you, Michael and Carrie. So how about some lessons learned? There we go. First one, and this seems elemental to me now, but it wasn't at the time. Of course, I wasn't here when this began, but a few years ago, I was still debating whether an organization like Berea College should outsource or do that digitization work in-house. So the question is to outsource or not to outsource. And even though we have kind of free labor, there's no way that the size of this project within a year's time frame could have been accomplished just with our staff and our equipment. So the grant provided money to outsource this material for digitization and normalization of the files. And I'm so glad that Berea College made that decision. And so if you're working in a small institution and you want to do this work, don't assume that you can do it on your own. You're probably going to need some outside help or to outsource this material if you can get funding for that. And here's a new revelation to some people, especially the perfectionists in the room. Some collections are just too large to complete in a single project. It's okay to do, say, a third of a collection and then build on that momentum to get additional grant support or additional staffing to do the rest. So take that off your worries list. You can do projects incrementally, and that's okay. Please try to reach out to persons whose permission forms or deeds cannot be found. I assumed when I told Harry, yes, please go ahead and do this, for every person we don't have a permission form, that it wouldn't have much result. And I want to say he got at least 80% of the persons or their families to say, wow, yes, we want this to be part of this online database, and we are honored that this is happening, instead of just sitting on the shelves in the back of the repository. So there are dividends to contacting these people. Not all subjects of oral history interviews want their data to be made public on the internet, and so please be aware of that. The very next day after we went live, we got a very anxious email followed by a very anxious phone call from an African-American member of the gay community who did not want his interview to be put out in public in front of everybody. He was feeling threatened by that possibility. So he asked us not only to take down the information, but to destroy the originals. So we had some conversations. I called him up, we had a couple different conversations, and eventually came to the point of saying, well, you know, for the sake of history, please suppress the record online, but people can use it in the reading room. I will give my permission for that. I just don't want it to be on the internet. And so we did exactly as he asked. And please do that, because it is not our goal to jeopardize people with projects like this. And I'm sure it is not your goal either. So listen to the feedback you get, especially from the subjects. Oh yeah, here we go. Metadata, metadata, metadata. Will you repeat that phrase with me, please? Metadata, metadata, metadata. Oh, there's always more metadata that we need, or more cleanup of metadata. It's just part of our existence these days. A few more lessons learned. Projects like this can build bridges beyond your department and institution, which is part of what gives me joy in this work, is building collaborative relationships with other people and with other organizations. So take advantage of things like this to look for partners who have a vested interest in what you're doing. Next, successful projects build team morale, team pride. And friends, that is so important, especially in these days of job uncertainty and other stresses. If you can take some time celebrating what has been accomplished and building morale and pride, it will pay you 100-fold the effort you put into it in the way of lowering anxiety and building loyalty among your staff and volunteers. Next, grateful donors are sometimes extra generous donors. That's a lovely lesson to learn. And finally, pandemics do not necessarily mean lower productivity. Yes, we needed that extra 6 months, but you know, we'd lost all our student helpers. And we came in with that extra 6 months. The project was done. In some ways, not having to man the reading room and be open in that way allowed us to work on projects like this in the background. And there's a lot that Harry could do at home, working just 1 day a week in the office to upload stuff, and then he could work on organizing it and doing metadata and so on at home for the rest of the week. It worked out fine for us. So even while the world burns around you, we still might be able to do some archival work. Think about that, please. All right. You know, I am really impressed and very pleased with Harry Rice's work on this project. And I'm grateful to other library staff members who stepped up to help. Naturally, I'm also thankful to the Kleins and to CLIR. Although the grant project concluded in December of 2020, work on the Klein collection continues. Harry has added more CLIR recordings to Preservica as the clients requested, and he has spent countless hours making Preservica access more user-friendly. That was a step that was not considered a few years ago. In recent weeks, we have invested a lot of time addressing an unforeseen problem. Last year's migration from Archon to archive space generated hyperlink errors in most of the CLIR records. So Harry and I have been very busy lately opening up every item level record, fixing the coding errors, and while we're there, improving the metadata. So in closing, here are some final observations, and you can take these either as words of encouragement or as words of admonition. Page up. Okay, first, legacy oral history projects and other audio-visual archival collections that sit on repository shelves in their original media, unreformatted, are not serving their intended purpose well. They are, in fact, dying of neglect. They are not getting better with age. And chances are they are getting no use. I ask you, when did you last page a reel-to-reel tape to the reading room? Second, oral history collections that lack permission forms or deeds of gift are going absolutely nowhere. Without intentional intervention, their destiny is the landfill. Third, oral histories that have not been transcribed or indexed are not useful to anyone but the most patient of researchers. Few are eager or willing to spend an hour or more listening to an entire recording in the hope of coming across a few moments of discussion on the topic of their research. Fourth, there are no shortcuts in oral history projects and AV collections, both old and new. Every step is a required element. Permissions, recording, transcription, reformatting, digital preservation, indexing, metadata, archival and library description, online access, active promotion. If you are tempted to start such a project, be sure to budget time and money for all of the above. Frankly, offers of new AV collections frighten me. They are alarmingly time and money consuming responsibilities. And yet, I know that we need new collections that will enable us to expand the diversity of voices and experiences that are archived. So collecting continues. If I could clone Harry Rice, I would send a carbon copy of him home with each of you today. Unfortunately, some laws prevent me from doing that. But what I can do is offer you these words of benediction. May you have inspiring dreams, grant writing success, excellent support staff, an abundance of perseverance, and many joyful celebrations of digital preservation projects that are completed successfully and online, on time, on schedule. Nearly so. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Are there any questions in the house?
Thank you so much, Tim. This has been excellent. We really appreciate it. For the purposes of our recording, we do request that you speak your question into the mic, so we can, fourth grade style, just flag me down if you have a question.
A solemn silence of archivists.
Thanks, Sheridan. This was a great talk. I took a lot of notes, so I'm very excited to kind of digest it all. But you referenced some of the collecting and preservation work that you've done with the Black community in the region. I was just wondering if you could tell us anything else about your thoughts on what you've done to reach out to other historically underdocumented groups that are kind of around you.
Well, actually, it is surprising to find in the Michael and Carrie Klein collection, which is recent history, they did their job as folklorists to seek out minority voices, the unheard voices of Appalachia. And so through their work and our follow-up work, we, I think, are very proud of the broad outreach or the broad scope of this project. And I have to say, a lot of people think of Berea College when they think of African American history and education. But Berea is still a school that is very heavily committed to abolition, which means, in modern sense, the removal of barriers of full acceptance of people for who they are, no matter why or what category they fall into. And so, for instance, we are a self-declared safe haven for DACA students and have been ever since they started being persecuted in this country or threatened in this country. And we are also a safe place for the LGBTQ community, which, you know, you'd think in the mountains of Kentucky might be a hard place to find. But Berea is an educational sanctuary and a living community of people, small enough that you get to know each other and that you can trust each other and hear each other's stories and get involved in each other's lives.
Thank you, Tim. This was a great presentation. I wonder if, do you have any experience yet with students using this collection? Students at Berea?
You know, this has been up not all that long, and I'm not personally aware. I think Harry will have received those requests for assistance to find particular recordings or particular topics. I think those have not come to my desk directly. But I'm really hoping that Harry has received a number of those requests. And our reading room is very active. We have classes come to the reading room as a group and then follow up students individually just about every other week of the school year.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. How do you handle rights and reproduction requests for the content in case it's used in a documentary or a television series?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do you manage the rights and reproduction requests that you receive for it being used maybe in a documentary series?
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Well, this is one of the interesting things. Earlier I had mentioned negotiating copyright terms, and the Kleins retain copyright right now, but they have declared that as of January 1st, 2047, that all those rights revert to Berea College. So right now, if you want to use it in a documentary, we refer you on to the Kleins, and as of 2047, we will have the privilege of taking care of that ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's very important. It is.
For sake of time, if there's one more question. I think you're going to have a nice lunch, Tim.
Yeah. Thank you again.